you have one time on this planet to enjoy life, right? And to do things that are meaningful and to make a difference. And I didn't feel like what I was doing was creative in the way that I thought it would be, and it wasn't just wasn't speaking to me. It wasn't feeding me. It wasn't filling my cup.
Welcome to Small Acts of Rebellion, a podcast where the unspoken narratives at the intersection of our personal and professional lives come to light. I'm your host, Heather Pridemore, your guide on this journey of discovery and defiance. Join me as we uncover the rebellious spirit that shapes our careers and lives. It's time to own your story. Are you ready?
Today's guest is Aaron Brown, an associate professor of engineering at Colorado State University, with expertise in humanitarian engineering, renewable energy, systems engineering, and sustainable systems. Aaron's work emphasizes empowering underserved communities through engineering, from smart city planning to 3D printed ventilators during the COVID outbreak. His background includes leadership roles in academia, groundbreaking research, and a passion for socially conscious technology. He has been recognized with numerous awards for his contributions to engineering and societal change. He has also spent some of his younger years as, in his words, a marginal professional cyclist. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
So I always love to tell people how I meet my guests or sort of where we got connected. And this is kind of interesting in the sense that we met at a Friendsgiving late last year. And so we'd never met before. Neither of us knew the other existed. But I heard you talking about some of your humanitarian work during dinner. And I was like, ooh, that could be a really interesting conversation for the podcast. So I'm just really glad you were game to come on the show.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's nice to have that interest.
Well, I think we could probably start, honestly, Aaron, with some of like your early school and career, because I think there's some interesting stories there. And so, your professional history spans everything from aerospace projects like the Mars Rover landing mechanism to your humanitarian engineering initiatives. Can you take us back to the earlier chapters of your story? So I want to know what stands out to you about the choices that you made like during college or even at the start of your career and how those are now, sort of reflective of your passion at the time.
Sure. Yeah. So I went to California State University, Chico, or Chico State, as most people call it. And it's a great school, fun place to go to school. I think it was like rated as a party school for many years, but I was an engineering student, so you can only do so much of that and still be able to graduate. Anyway, I really enjoyed my time there. And when I was graduating, I remember we had to give these 3x5 cards to the head of our department, who would like read them out to the audience of what we're going to be doing next. It'd be like, John Smith would like to thank his parents for helping him with college, and he's going to go work at Hewlett Packard or something like that. And my card was different from everyone else's. And when he read my card, he said, well, everyone who wanted to get a job got a job. Aaron's going to go race his bike in Italy. And so I sort of have always had that follow, what you're passionate about. This is, if you have an opportunity to do something that you have always wanted to do, even if it's scary, you should kind of try it. It's kind of been my MO in life, I guess. And so I went to Italy and I raced bikes in Italy for a while. And that was a really awesome experience. And I got to I learned to speak a little Italian and get immersed in the culture. And it really opened my eyes to, different perspectives and different parts of the world. And then when I came back, I was sort of suddenly lost because I had these goals and I was back in the States and I was like, what am I going to do now? And I had some good job opportunities and offers that were kind of actually like mind blowing for me at the time, from being this poor student to suddenly having a job offer that was going to pay me like way more than I ever imagined I could make. But it didn't speak to me. So I decided to go to grad school, and I ended up in Boulder, Colorado. And I have to admit that, I was excited to go to school. I love learning. I love being in classes, but also Boulder had a draw for me because of my cycling interests. And I thought, if I keep going to school, I can keep racing my bike. If I get this engineering job, I won't have enough time to do that anymore. So I kind of came here and I envisioned, moving to Colorado. I've never been here. I envisioned like big horses carrying like cases of beer through the snow and stuff in the winter. And that it was going to be like, bought an indoor trainer and I'm from Northern California. So, and it was like 72 degrees and sunny in January when I moved here. And I thought, oh, this is kind of nice. And anyway, the rest is history. I ended up staying here. So that's kind of my early undergrad transitioning into going to get my master's and et cetera.
So, Aaron, it sounds to me like, first of all, when you left undergrad, you were really following your passion. So, what did that period of like cycling and then going to Italy and then ultimately kind of making decisions about your future around this idea of cycling? How did all that work?
God, it was just kind of delusional at the time because I just was addicted to this bike racing, and I was like everything in my life. I mean, I was obviously still going when I went to school, I still focused on my studies and I was a good student, but like bike racing was really important to me. And I can't believe I was that into it actually now looking back, it's just sort of like an addiction really. So yeah, I kind of always I started bike racing when I was young, and there's Europe is kind of the place where you do that. And so going to Italy and being able to do that was a dream. And I had the opportunity. I had a friend who was living over there, and he said, "Hey, you could like sleep in my guest room, and you can be on our cycling team here and stuff. Just get yourself to Italy." And so I like basically sold everything I had, which was not much at all because I was a student, and then you know used all that money and even took like an online class or a distance class, which really didn't exist back then, from Italy in order to be able to take out student loans to help finance the trip as well. So there was, I mean, I was, you could say I was kind of leveraging my educational experience to like feed my cycling addiction, I would say almost. But yeah, it was great. I got to go over there, and I think that it changed the way I look at the world, right? Like if you travel, you see different ways of thinking, different ways of living, and you realize that there's more out there, more ways to do things and to think about things. And having that open mind has influenced my career in positive ways since, I think.
Did any of your humanitarian inklings begin while you were in Europe, or was that something that started well before you ever went on this sort of international journey?
I mean, I never pictured myself going the direction I did with my career. I've always been an empathetic person and cared about others and what's going on in their lives. And I would say though that yeah, traveling, not this trip in particular, but other trips, because I've been in a lot of places now in the world, you sort of start to see the disparity that exists. And when you see that disparity, I thought, how can I be a positive influence on moving the needle in the right direction to help people. And so like I've been to India 3 times, and if you've never been to India as an American, it's like there's no way you can describe it. There's just the sounds and the smells and the chaos. It's chaos, and there's just no way to describe it. It's really beautiful too. um, but when I was there, I was like, okay, there's some intense stuff going on here. And I sort of, after my master's degree, I took a job with Ball Aerospace, and I was working on like really cool stuff. I worked on Hubble robotics mission, which was like a mission to service the Hubble telescope with robots changing the batteries and stuff like that. And then later on, I worked at another company, and I was really fortunate enough to be able to work on the Mars Curiosity and the Mars Perseverance. Later on, the same design was used for that, the landing mechanism. And that was like, that's kind of the pinnacle of mechanical engineering work, right? You get to work on stuff that NASA's building, in this case, JPL, NASA's building to go to Mars. I mean, how cool is that? But I really wasn't like feeling it, I was there in the office, and I was working on what should be like also what I thought was my dream, to have work on this cool stuff. And the best part of my day was I would go for little walks, and there were like llamas that I would pet near where I was working. And I thought, this isn't really for me. And to backtrack a little bit, while I was racing bikes and I had just finished my master's degree, I was offered a nighttime job teaching physics at the community college. And I was sort of, I had to take that opportunity because I was like the worst pro cyclist in America. Basically, I didn't make that much money. And so in order to like feed myself and stuff, I had to have some sort of work. And that was actually pretty, fit with my training and everything. And I realized during that experience that I enjoyed teaching. and I enjoyed working with students and helping people grow and learn. And so while I had this job later on working on the Mars Curiosity, I said, well, maybe I should look into teaching because I really enjoyed that. And I was fortunate enough to get a job at Metropolitan State University. At that time, it was Metro State College in the engineering department, and that's kind of led me to where I am now.
What I really like about your story, Aaron, is that first of all, you followed a passion, which I mean, like, sort of had a time clock on it, right? I mean, you can only be a professional cyclist for so long in your life. And so you kind of you pursued a passion, but that actually led in a lot of ways to your calling, right? So as you think about like teaching and humanitarian work, you sort of just trusted your gut on like, let's just call it the fun side of life, and that led to you finding other ways of like fulfilling yourself and earning an income and all of those things. And I think the reason I like that version of the story is because, I grew up blue collar, and I think there was a lot of pressure right away to try to like figure things out and be very pragmatic. And so in a lot of ways, I used college as a bit of an excuse to be able to still get a degree, but pursue something that was of interest to me. And so I actually went to college for fine art, knowing full and well that, like, unless I went into commercial art, there was a good chance that wasn't necessarily a lucrative career path. But I also felt confident that all I needed was a degree and I could figure out the rest. And so I kind of used college as a way to kind of check the box and be pragmatic, while at the same time seeing it as like maybe my only opportunity to do something that would maybe like be something I really wanted versus something that I had to do, right? Like the sort of responsibility side of career and life and all those things. And so what I really enjoy about your journey is that you led with the fun side, and that actually led you to the more fulfilling and pragmatic and all of those things. So just kind of a new perspective to have on how to think about those early years.
Yeah. I mean, I would add to that I was kind of intimidated to go to college, and I'm the only one of my siblings who went to college. And I just thought, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm taking out student loans and stuff. It's going to be then what type of thing. But once I got there, it wasn't what I imagined it would be. Like I thought college was going to be all work, and like you're just up until like midnight doing homework, and you're just in class. But actually, it ended up being like you meet new people that are interesting and they're motivated, and you see new ways of thinking about things, and you're taking classes that you never imagined you would take that open your eyes. I mean, I took ballroom dance class twice in college because it was so much fun. I was like, I'm going to do that again. That was a lot of fun. And so, yeah, I think that not only did college allow me to do my cycling probably more than I would have if I had been working full time, but it also like introduced me to a whole new area, way of thinking and new perspectives and a new world. And so, like, it's like kind of not really a coincidence, I guess, after that experience. And I really enjoyed college that I actually work at a university now, because even though it's obviously not the same being faculty versus being a student, you're still in a dynamic environment where people are doing cool things and you're surrounded by that. And that's motivating for me.
One of the things I wanted to just pull out a little bit more, Aaron, is when you were talking about some of those like projects that you were working on where you're doing like the pinnacle of engineer work, right? A lot of the traditional markers of success for your industry, right? Like the kind of work that others would be envious that you were getting to do. And you sort of said to yourself, like, I'm not really like, this isn't really my jam. I'm not really enjoying this. And so I was just hoping you would talk a little bit more about that, because I think that really is the beginning of where, in my very limited knowledge of you, I feel like that's sort of the beginning of where you really started aligning your values with the work that you were doing. And I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. I think you nailed that. You have one time on this planet to enjoy life, right? And to do things that are meaningful and to make a difference. And I didn't feel like what I was doing was creative in the way that I thought it would be. And it wasn't, just wasn't speaking to me. It wasn't feeding me. It wasn't filling my cup. And so when I went to go teach, I took a huge pay cut. And, that's like, was never really my big motivation, was never money. but it was like poverty level wages basically. And so like I did things like I would like buy used cars and drive them for 6 months and then sell them to try and make more money to like sort of offset that those low wages, which is not really ideal for being a good faculty member, etc. But I loved it. I loved that job. I got to Metro State and I loved working with students and I got to be creative. And when I was there, I was involved with a group. We created a new degree program called Sustainable Systems Engineering that was very innovative and undergraduate level systems thinking engineering and dealing with sustainability and stuff that's very important. And I worked on, it's kind of where I got involved in this humanitarian engineering stuff. Because when you're at the university, you don't have a product that you need to sell that the company is asking you to make. You get to be really creative. You get to do you, right? And it was during this time I went to a conference, an Engineers Without Borders conference, and I'd traveled a bit and seen the disparities I'd spoken about earlier. And at this conference, I saw this work that people were doing in order to, positively affect the world. And I thought, this is speaking to me. This is like, I like this. And, I'd been running like the NASA club and other things you have to do at the university. I created a study abroad class in humanitarian engineering to go to Costa Rica with students. And I remember my boss was like, "You just want to go to Costa Rica and party on the beach with your students?" And I'm like, "No, it's humanitarian engineering. We actually have a community we're going to work with." But while I was on this experience, which was awesome, it was an awesome experience, and some of my students are friends with me on social media still from that time. I kind of realized I don't know what I'm doing, and I could really, I could really, have negative effects on a community if we do something wrong. And I thought I need to study this. I need to learn more about this. And as I was learning about it, I learned about Bernard Amadei, who is the founder of Engineers Without Borders. And he actually lives in Boulder. He worked at CU. And I mean, he's pretty well known in those circles. He's done a lot of amazing projects and amazing work. And I was at McGuckin's Hardware one day and I ran into him. And there's Bernard. So I introduced myself to him. He was buying a snow shovel. And he ended up saying, "Oh, come to my office and I'll show you, well, let's make an appointment. You can see the work we're doing there." And while I was there, and I have to add, I was a professor at this point with just a master's degree, which is highly unusual. But it kind of also became clear if I wanted to stay in this field, I should probably get a PhD because I wasn't going to get tenure. Probably there was some politics going on there. And so Bernard offered for me to be his PhD student doing humanitarian engineering stuff. So it's a big shift from like aerospace and mechanical stuff to like now you're going to do this other thing. And I remember just the way he sold it to me. He talked about compassion and engineering with compassion and engineering with empathy and thinking about humanity, which is like, you don't talk about things like that in engineering programs, It's totally spoke to me. So I took the opportunity and kept my job. So I was still working as a professor while getting my PhD. And it was an exciting time and also a very, very busy time because I did my PhD in 2.5 years in order to get tenure. And that's insane. It's like usually 5 years to do the PhD.
It's very accelerated. One of the things that I want to just dive in a little deeper on, because you just kind of spoke to some of the projects that you did. So we're seeing this evolution of how your values and your work and your education, everything's kind of starting to fall in place, right? And you're starting to find this alignment. But one of the other things that really stands out to me about your story, Aaron, is how your own understanding of how this relationship between an organization's culture and your own personal values. And I just want you to speak a little bit more about how those two things, along with your work, how that relationship evolved over time, because I think that's such an interesting point in your story. And it's also one of the key moments where, I mean, you were always kind of following your passions, but I feel like that part of your journey really shows a level of self-advocacy. And, and I think for many of us, there's a lesson in there, because how often do people stay someplace where the culture is no longer in alignment with their values and they're suffering, but they don't leave or, don't make a change or don't try to influence change because for whatever reason, and so I just think it's an important aspect of your journey.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So yeah, I think I mentioned that when I first started at Metro State, I mean, I loved the job. I was so motivated and excited, and I had a lot of support. Like of my work that I was doing got attention, and that all felt great, right? It's good for your ego, but also it means that if you get attention for your work, that means you have kind of more freedom to do better good things, or more good things. I mean, the first project I did that was kind of humanitarian engineering related, besides the study abroad class, was we built soda can solar furnaces that use like the sun to heat the air inside these cans that were tubes to help lower people's energy bills in Denver, in this poor neighborhood in Denver. And that was like on NPR. And then, I was recognized as like outstanding researcher at the university. And then I got the Martin Luther King Junior Peace Award that year for positive change, and all the stuff that was really felt like reassuring for what I was doing. And I had a supportive chair and a supportive dean, and it was everything was great. And I thought, I'm going to stay here forever. And then at some point, the university, there were some politics that came into play, and they hired a guy who's kind of came in to like dismantle things instead of, he didn't have the building things and changing mentality. It was about dismantling. And he targeted the sustainable systems engineering program that we had created. And he was doing it like this sort of covert way. And so I brought it up to the dean because I was concerned about decisions that were being made. And then it became kind of clear through that process that this was intentional. It wasn't just like someone being inept. And I got, instead of being like supported in my work, I was suddenly, because I was asking questions, I was sort of marginalized at work, and it felt terrible. It was really stressful, actually. And I also realized I wasn't going to have the opportunity to do the things that I had been doing there. And that was really, I really struggled with that because I thought I was going to be there forever, basically. So I applied for other jobs, and I had several opportunities, and I'm really happy that I was able to accept a job at Colorado State University. And I'm in a very supportive, positive environment there. A great department. Everybody's doing cool stuff. It's like it's next level as far as like innovation goes. And I think I followed it's scary to change jobs after. I was there 15 years at MSU Denver, and I was full professor, and I was head of the director of the mechanical engineering department or program. So to go from that to like being the new guy at a whole different institution where nobody knows my work, it's sort of a scary leap to make. But I'm so glad I did it. It was the right decision, because now I go to work and I know that I'm supported, and I know that what I do will get backed, and I'll have positive environment around me.
There's a couple of things I just want to pull at, Aaron. So the first is you were talking about all of the like accolades and attention that you were getting for this work that you were doing, and you talked about how validating that was. But my own curiosity was sort of like, did that also add pressure? And the reason I ask is because that's been my own experience, is like every time I got an award or I leveled up, it just felt like the bar had been set a little bit higher. And so I'm just curious, like, what has been your experience about these sort of awards and acknowledgments? Do they add pressure, or do they simply just feel validating and like vindicating for the work that you're doing?
I mean, it felt great on a personal level to have this validation, but there definitely was pressure. But the pressure was more, I was viewed as someone who was competent. Everybody wanted me to be part of their project now, or their team or whatever at the university. And so I was like given like probably way more work than others, because I could get it done, and I was easy to work with. And I think that's where it was kind of external pressure, not internal. But I mean, I think that I had, you have to be careful sometimes when you're getting this recognition in an academic setting, for example, that you don't want to be too boastful or anything about it, because others can kind of feel like it's putting pressure on them as well to kind of keep up, and that's not a positive work environment. So that can probably be edited out. I didn't say that very eloquently.
No, I think it's genuine though. I mean, I think, it's easy to work in a place or to go through life even and sort of pretend that these dynamics don't exist, but the reality is they do. And so part of the focus of the conversations I like to have on the show is like everything we're doing, the personal, the professional, the politics, the emotions, they all intersect, and that creates our experiences. You can't compartmentalize all of these things. Like they don't exist in their own zones. It's all just one zone, and you're just navigating all of these various like inputs and obstacles. And so I think it's real, right? So I mean, like, you're talking about things like bureaucracy and the politics of the like academia world, but in a corporate setting we have a lot of those same functions, right? A lot of bureaucracy, a lot of politics. And to your point, cultures can change and shift very quickly when you're bringing someone new into an environment. And you talked about this new person and how they were more of someone, instead of building things, they were there more to like dismantle things. And so when you start thinking about like value alignment, and I don't know this person, but let's just assume that this person's value is like streamlining and optimization. Like, we'll just benefit of the doubt that like this dismantling had more to do in their mind with like, I'm someone who streamlines and like, operationalizes and optimizes and all these things. And then here you're someone whose values are more aligned with innovation and like human-centered like solutions and continuous learning and all of these things that like really result in like the building of something versus like the streamlining of something. And so I just think it's that mix of people. And for what it's worth, that's been my experience too. I mean, I worked at two organizations, make up a bulk of my corporate career. And in both cases, there was a point in time where someone new came into the mix and really just significantly impacted the culture and the environment and the experience of being in those places and spaces. And so it would be remiss and naive of us to pretend like those types of things don't like happen, because it's part of all of our experience. There's a universal theme there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it becomes pretty difficult for someone who does care about the students and cares about the direction of the work that's been done to see it being dismantled and like really sabotaged, actually, not just dismantled for an excuse to dismantle it. So yeah, I had to move on. You had to go somewhere where your work is supported. Like, you can't be in an environment where you're being marginalized because you're asking questions. And there definitely was retaliation that I experienced. And I think it's become a pretty toxic environment because of one individual, and not just for myself, but I chose to leave. And I'm so happy I did because, bigger, better things ahead.
Well, let's talk about that. So you made the choice to leave. And then
Mm-hmm.
now you're faced with some new challenges, right? Because you're leaving an environment that doesn't align with your values, but now you're having to assess the next one to make sure, ideally, that it does. And so, what did that process look like for you, Aaron? Because you said you had more than one opportunity. So, like, how are you vetting those choices to make sure that this like next step was better aligned with your values than the step that you were leaving?
Yeah, that was a stressful time, honestly, to make those decisions. In retrospect, it was stressful. At the time, maybe I didn't recognize what I was feeling and going through, and I had a little PTSD where I'd leaving this environment where I'd really been, because of asking questions, I had been kind of pushed aside. And so you're kind of like, well, I don't want to end up in another bad environment. And so you're sort of looking for red flags and pitfalls and stuff in your interviews. And I had some great job interviews, and I met, you're interviewing the company as well when you go to these things. It's not, or in this case, the university. But like, I'm really happy where I ended up because they came to me. They kind of created a whole new position after they interviewed me. They realized that the position they were advertising for was kind of not the level that they needed to offer, and so they kind of created a whole new job position for me and brought me in and said, go do good work. And that was an amazing feeling. And I felt like I made the right decision to have that supportive environment. But yeah, I think that your past experiences when you're going through, leaving some place that had been positive and then switched, kind of went south, that you don't want to experience that again. You want to invest yourself in somewhere where you're going to continue to be able to do good work. And it was hard to know if I was making the right decision, but I knew I had to leave where I was. I knew that wasn't correct. I had to follow my gut on that. That place was not working anymore. It was not serving me, and it wasn't allowing me the freedom to do the good work that I had, done in the past. And I had to go somewhere that was going to give me that support.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the things that you said to me well, it's funny because you just said about, doing good work, and it reminded me of something you said to me when we were first talking, and you were like, you just do good things. And so I think that that's a good segue, because what I want to talk about is more of your humanitarian work. And so your contributions span everything from AI drought forecasting models to biogas scrubbing systems and solar heating for the underserved communities that you mentioned earlier that was featured on NPR. And so when you think about your journey, how has service shaped your approach to life and work? And are there moments where you felt called to sort of step outside your usual work to focus on something that was bigger? And so this is really zoning in more on that calling.
I think that when you see vulnerable, marginalized people who are living in really harsh conditions, and you have some skills that can be useful to improve those conditions, I feel called to use those skills to make things better. And I mean, a lot of the world does live in very, very marginalized conditions. And I mean, there are people who don't have clean water, and they don't have access to electricity, and they don't have regular bathrooms, and cooking, the indoor cooking with smoke in their kitchens and stuff, all kinds of stuff that's bad for their health, and maybe not even regular, like the nutrition insecurity, et cetera. So I saw that some of the skills that I have could be helpful. And when you see the positive impact that can make, a light goes off and it clicks, and you realize that this is a calling. This is like a purpose that can then make a positive change in the world, even if only for one person. And so you asked about times I've stepped outside of my normal, like what I was doing. I think COVID was a good example. So when COVID happened, I thought, what can I do that can be helpful here? And one of the things that we were reading about early on in the COVID outbreak was that there's going to be a shortage of ventilators. There's going to be we won't have the medical equipment. We don't even really know how to use the medical equipment. And I read about this engineer in Italy who had taken scuba masks and sort of transformed them to be breathing apparatus to help people who had COVID. And so I contacted him, and then he gave me his plans, and then I adjusted them for our machines and our equipment. And we ended up using the 3D printer in our lab and printing like all these valves. There was a learning process, but making valves that adapted these scuba masks to be like breathing things to help people with COVID. And I remember a doctor actually telling me that she had a patient come in. He had bad COVID. This is before there were any treatments, before there was a vaccine, before they knew what to do. They knew if they intubated him, he would likely not survive. They knew if they did nothing, he would likely not survive. So they said, well, let's try. At this point, there was like emergency laws in place that allowed us to try things. Let's try this mask thing that I provided. And they said 3 days later, he's upright in bed, he's telling jokes, and he's eating food, and he went home. And so at least that one person, is alive now because of this invention. And so I made 140 of them and 85 went to the Navajo Nation, who were really hit hard. I remember they came to my house, someone from the Navajo Nation, and I just handed them a box of like masks and valves and instructions. And then they said thanks and drove off, and hopefully those were helpful for people. So, that was one area where I was like, this is something I have a 3D printer a big 3D printer at work, like the biggest one in Colorado at the time. We have materials. I have the ability to do some engineering work here. And so went with it.
When you were talking, it kind of reminded me of this. There's this article. It's a kind of an older Harvard Business Review article. And the thing that I always take away from it is the concept of fault versus responsibility. And in the definition of responsibility, it just basically says, like, if you notice something, then you now own the responsibility to like do something about it. And so, in the article, it's not necessarily saying that like, if you see people, are having trouble with like breathing, that you have to invent something. It could just be something about, if you notice something, maybe you're just getting the right person involved, or if you can do something, like maybe it's something simple, like there's trash on the ground and you saw it, so you should pick it up and put it in the recycling bin or whatever. And so as I was listening to Aaron, I was thinking a lot about the concepts of like altruism and the idea between like fault and responsibility. And I think it's really easy for us sometimes to say like, that's not my problem. You know, whether or not we have the resources or the know with all to be able to do something about it, I think it's really easy for us to say that's not my problem. And I recognize that sometimes, you know, people are in a place where they have to just like protect their peace and sort of have that division between themselves and others. But I think it's really interesting that you saw this situation and you took the responsibility to do something about it. And so I think that's really cool. I also was curious, like, coming from a tech background, I'm used to concepts about like, you know, human-centered design, design thinking, agile, waterfall, like all these approaches to like development and ideation. And so I'm just curious, like, where do you feel like the way you think is grounded? Like if there was something that you feel like your thought process is anchored to, like, is there a concept within the engineering space that you're like, everything kind of always ties back to this concept in some way, shape, or form?
That's an interesting question. And I would say each of the projects I've done, it's about solving problems. And so even in humanitarian engineering, it's not always a technical solution. Like I went with students, we went to Lesbos, Greece to look at the refugee camps there. So there's all these Syrian people who were, you know, fleeing because of the war. And to get to Europe, it was like the closest place for them. They would go to Turkey and then they would do this very dangerous crossing. It was like 2 or 3 miles, I think, to get to this island. And then suddenly they're in Europe and they can get asylum. And, you know, people would perish on that journey. It's very sad to see, and people were living in really harsh conditions. And so we went there and we thought about what kind of solutions can we offer as ideation that can make things better at these camps. And so none of the solutions were technical that we came up with. They were like organizational solutions, like how do you organize people getting in line for getting food and stuff like that, so they're not fighting over food. What's a better system? But what actually came out of that trip, which was unexpected, we talk about unexpected things happening because of whatever path you take. The students who were with me, a lot of them were veterans, and they felt some guilt over what they were seeing because, you know, some of our foreign policy stuff has led to some of these situations. You know, there were like Iraqi refugees there as well. And they also felt connected to this humanitarian engineering work. It was like something that helped them sort of reintegrate into social society and gave them a purpose when they had left the military after, you know, kind of being kind of lost for a bit. And so they started an organization called Veterans Without Borders. And the idea is to get veterans who have these great skill sets involved in projects that can be of service to people who are vulnerable. And it's also good for the veterans because it helps provide that community, which sometimes is lost during that, you know, leaving the military and stuff. And so I'm really proud to still be involved with those students. They're not students anymore, and their work that they're doing to advance these skills to help people.
Yeah, I love that, transferable skills, right? And so in a lot of ways, aspects of your own story are about transferable skills, but like what a great sort of parallel story about, you know, veterans who are able to take the skills that they developed in the military and then turn that into humanitarian work while also finding things that fulfill them, like community. And I don't know, I like transferable skills is one of those things we always talk about. And I would say, especially in the like, I'm in search of a new job conversation. But I think that A, transferable skills are so like underrated. And then B, their application is so much greater than just the sort of some of their parts. Like when I'm making my resume or trying to change, you know, industries, there's so many interesting and creative applications for transferable skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that, I mean, the thing that really you were asking what kind of grounds my work, the unifying theme is that there's creativity in these projects where you see, you know, a creative solution to make a positive influence.
Well, Aaron, we are coming near the end of our show, and I love to end every episode by saying if someone said this episode was way too long, I did not listen. What is like one message that you'd want them to take away from our conversation?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. I think for me, the lesson that I've learned from my life is to follow my passions and to follow what is pulling me, and to be reasonable about that, and with open eyes kind of go into things, but to sort of say, hey, I feel calling for this, and to listen to your gut on situations, to really listen to yourself and say, this is like leaving my last job was a hard decision to make, but it was totally the right decision. And in retrospect, like I would not do that differently. I would definitely do that again. And so I think see where you're at and see what is calling you. And for myself, that's has served me well.
Well, thank you. I think that's a really great lesson to follow your gut and to sort of really think about your situation. That action of reflection is one that I think none of us do enough of, or, in my own journey, there was even a period where I kind of felt like I got disconnected from my intuition. And so, a good lesson in there, Aaron. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story. So many interesting aspects to your journey.
Thanks for inviting me. It was great to be here.
If you enjoyed this episode and are seeking to redefine success on your own terms, subscribe to Small Acts of Rebellion and join a community that celebrates authenticity and personal growth.